Was this removed move actually broken by False Swipe Gaming in regard to competitive Pokemon?
In Generation 8, 2 moves that had ranked among Pokemon's most defining since Gold and Silver were removed. We have already made a video on one of them, Pursuit, which we are now following with this video on the other such move, Hidden Power. Hidden Power originated as the signature move of the Unknown, but they hadn't had any competitive impact, great as they may have been in using the move in the third Pokemon movie, which may as well have been—
Yeah, no, Unknown had a place in the third Pokemon movie, but outside of that, Unknown really hasn't done anything and is really just used to make funny memes and spell funny things.
Been directed by David Lynch. Hidden Power itself has been similarly surreal in the competitive world. It was normalized for a long time, despite the uncanny nature of any coverage made available to every Pokemon, and we accepted it, even as we stared its drastic, overpowering effect in the face. And then
I would argue that Terra is just kind of an extension of Hidden Power at this point in time, because so Hidden Power is based off your IVs. If you have certain amounts of IVs, it will determine what hidden power you have, and it can be different depending. That's why you will get certain Pokemon that will in past metagames, they'll run purposely lower speed, or purposely lower attack or defense in order to get a certain hidden power type for coverage. That way you can have, something that's, 4x weak to ice, but, suddenly you have a counter to the opponent's move, or, you have like grass coverage with like, Raikou or something like that, right? There's a number of instances where hidden powers absolutely come up. And nowadays, at least with Pokemon Generation 9 Scarlet and Violet, you're able to just, have your Raikou and grass Terra type him, and suddenly he has, stab on any grass moves that he may or may not learn. So it's a little different. I would argue it's the successor, if not necessarily that it's the, next step of this. But that also led to a lot of controversy, especially in the competitive scene, because Pokemon have 6 stats. You got your HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed, and any of these can be a value from 0 to 31, and there's a lot of variance in that. Especially, it wasn't really until more recent games that things had been, these have guaranteed like 3 IVs. I think Gen 5 started that, and you can kind of control that a little better, and you can bottle cap that, but it just, that led into some weird interactions, especially when, you're running GSC format and you have your Raikou or your Zapdos, and they have to run certain hidden powers to compete in the metagame. But if you have a shiny Raikou and Zapdos, what are the odds that everybody has this, right? And so then it becomes not necessarily that everyone is cheating, but there's allegations passed around, and certain things you're like, well, okay, well, how is this? How does everyone have this? How can we better control this? Is it all just RNG? Is there a way to actually guarantee this? And from a game standpoint, outside of Pokemon, I think this leads to a lot of interesting negative interactions, if that makes sense, and allegations can get thrown around.
We woke up with its removal and fully realized just how much of a dream world we had been in previously. Now, this is not to say we think hidden power necessarily should have been removed. We'll reach our conclusion on that later, but it certainly was something that floated around with normality until a certain event ripped back the blue velvet curtains and forced us to confront its terror head on. Today, we're going to dive fully into the impact hidden power had on the competitive scene and see if it should come back in style or remain banished in a realm of nothingness as it currently is. And so we ask, do we live inside a dream in which hidden power should have been removed? But before we start, I gotta tell you, I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts and audiobooks while I do basically everything, thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Raycon. I use Raycon's top-notch but affordable wireless earbuds pretty much 24/7. I listen to Ali Abdal's feel-good productivity because I certainly need that while I record and edit footage all day to make these videos. I'll listen to music while I meal prep, or if I need to go for a walk when I need a break from everything. What would I do without these things? Honestly, probably cry. It's the new year, and Raycon's everyday earbuds are vastly improved in look, feel, and most importantly, sound. The best part is that they offer roughly 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, which is great because, like I said, I basically use them the entire day. Optimized gel tips, they fit perfectly in my ears and never fall out. Some of my favorite bonus features is being able to switch between noise isolation or awareness mode. Now I can be either completely immersed or present whenever I want. And of course, Raycon's touch features make it super easy to control whenever I want to hear the next song, reject calls, or switch between sound profiles. So if you want affordable, high quality earbuds and also support the channel to help us produce more content, click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/FSG to get 15% off of your Raycon purchase and free shipping.
I thought it was a good ad read. It didn't feel like he was reading from a script, and he could have been reading from a script for all I know, but it didn't feel like he was reading from a script, which is an A in my book, right? So many creators, today's our sponsor is this. Did you know that X amount of people deal with this issue? And, in order to combat that, here is this product. And today, I wanted to promote this, with my link down in the description, you can use this to get, X% off this product. And how it just feels homogenized, and how it's just like, oh my God, another ad read, right? But it didn't feel like he was reading from a script. It did feel like maybe it went a little too long, but that also could be advertiser constraints, because certain companies, certain advertisers will be like, hey, you need to give us X amount of screen time. And I want to normalize that if it's long, that's not necessarily bad. That could be an actual point on you need to give us X amount of time for this ad read. And especially if that is the case, I mean, I think it was a fairly good ad read, solid 8 out of 10. I have seen much, much, much worse. We like to critique the ad reads here. FSG, you did an amazing job on that ad read.
Funnily enough, a long time ago in the much smaller OU metagame of GSC OU, Hidden Power was banned, in a way anyway. There was a significant period of time in the second generation where Zapdos and Raikou were not allowed to use Hidden Power. The HP Legends ban, as it was called, at first cited the difficulty of obtaining these two Pokemon with appropriate Hidden Powers in-game. But the real reason was that the two were considered overly difficult to answer when Hidden Power amped up their coverage. After all, this only extended to these two. Nobody was campaigning to remove Hidden Power from Articuno, Moltres, Suicune, or Entei. As a result, the ban was sometimes referred to as HP Yellows, since it really was just about Zapdos and Raikou. With Hidden Power in their arsenal, they were safely answered more or less only by Blissey, Snorlax, sometimes anyway, and, well, none other than opposing Raikou. Meanwhile, without...
Right, which leads to, and outside of even if we're just going to throw all of the difficulty in obtaining it, right? At that point, you're entering a Yu-Gi-Oh! Teledad format, right? Where, well, what do you play? You play Teledad. What else do you play? You play Teledad. Really? You can kind of play anti-Teledad, but what else do you play? You play Teledad, right? And that's an example of a tier 0 format. This isn't necessarily that, but a format in which there is threats like Raikou, I almost said Entei, like Raikou, like Zapdos, right? And they're not necessarily answered, not even necessarily checked. They can kind of deal with it if things go well, but the fact that it's not necessarily... That's what I'm looking for. The fact that it's not necessarily, there's not really a true counter or a true check to that, especially with Hidden Power in their kit. I mean, it develops into a stale game state. It develops into a uninteresting and boring game state at that point. And so from a gameplay and game design decision at that point, you make the decision to, look, these two, Zapdos and Raikou, cannot have Hidden Power. At that point, they are just too omnipresent. At that point, they just have too much in their kit for the format. I mean, it's like if you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And you bring Sky Striker and everyone else is playing GOAT format. Or if you're playing Magic the Gathering and everyone's playing Pauper at the table, but you bring full-powered mono-green Tron from Modern in, right? The power level is kind of different, and there's certain things that can just outright, Pauper, what's going to deal with a Blightsteel Colossus in MTG, right? What's going to deal back in Sword and Shield, right? What necessarily deals with a Dynamaxed Tornadus Therian, right? Or not Tornadus, excuse me, Landorus Therian, right? And that's decisions you have to make, and what you're going to cut, what you're not going to cut, what is acceptable for a metagame, what isn't acceptable for a metagame. Is it still a diverse and competent and, maybe not necessarily the most varied, but is it still a good metagame versus it being a bad metagame, which you have 7 picks, right? These are all things to consider when designing games.
Hidden Power, pretty much every ground type in the tier would switch into them well. The basic idea was that with Hidden Power, electrics were too difficult to answer because you couldn't even use ground types to answer them. Zapdos took this to an extreme by actually switching in against grounds, which was a major contributor to the more or less accurate idea that Zapdos countered practically everything, even those grounds that were supposed to help soften the blow from its lacks, cracking thunders, and this in a nutshell was the Hidden Power dilemma.
And so that's the thing. If you are getting a switch on your counter, right? And let's just go rock, paper, scissors, right? Just basic. We're not going to talk about Pokemon types here for a second. You got your rock, paper, scissors, right? Your rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock, right? Well, what happens if you have your rock come in and suddenly now it can come in safely on paper and suddenly rock wins? Well, suddenly your rock beats 2 out of 3, right? So rock becomes the thing that you just use, right? So now extending this into Pokemon, right, where you have an electric flying that's as bulky as Zapdos is in a very bulky format, which GSC was already, you end up having a situation where you are actively incentivized to swap into the thing that is designed to be your counter, right? For those that don't play Pokemon, electric types are weak to ground, right? If you have, a Thundercat and you Earthquake the Thundercat, right, the Earth is going to just wreak havoc, right? But, Zapdos being flying, it's a little bit different. If you are incentivized to swap into it, your supposed counter, that becomes an issue, and thus we run into rock beats two things now. How do we address this? Because now it can just deal with its supposed counters because of its hidden power, and even Raikou could as well. On a good predict, I mean, if you can predict that they're going to bring in their Marowak, if you can predict that they're going to bring in like a Golem or something like that, and you use that hidden power ice, right? Well, on a good it rewards skilled play and skilled predicts and even gambles like that, but it does lead into a situation where you just use them.
Access to any type coverage in the game was too much of an increase, even if the base power didn't seem too impressive on paper. Now, hidden power usually didn't result in a ban. Even the HP Legends GSC ban was eventually overturned, but it's easy to see how the move allowing Pokemon to circumvent their move pools and nullify would-be answers could make for a potentially overbearing effect. In a sense, hidden power is not dissimilar to Terastallization and Terra Blast. Obviously not nearly as enormous an effect, but the option to completely turn the tables on would-be checks is similar, right down to the little details. That, as powerful as both are, they do not come at no opportunity cost.
I would actually argue that Terra is a lot more fair. Terra is one of the most fair mechanics we've had. That being said, I'm not upper echelon VGC or anything like Flick, anyone like that, right? I do think that it is a big brain mechanic. I do think it is designed better than Dynamax and Gigantamax. As much as I love that mechanic, it is problematic in a competitive sphere. And I think that it does reward skilled play, right? We have a Fire Terra type superior, right? And we have Terra Blast, that way it can go and check check in, if not counter, the Corviknight, right? But I would argue the tempo for that is too large, right? Where if you do this, right, you are wasting your once per battle ability, right? Because you can only Terra type once, and then you have to have Terra Blast already on that Pokemon. So you're actually having to spec into this kit, and you have a limited amount of time to use it. And if on a good predict, if they predict what your typing is, right? So say, for instance, if they swapped out to, say, something like Garchomp, and you Terra Fire, and suddenly it's not going to be very effective, right? I mean, you've effectively checked that, and now they're down some Terra turns. So, there's some play that comes into that, but the tempo is not the same as hidden power. With hidden power, you can have Zapdos or Raikou. Say if you're trying to counter your ground type weakness, right? You have the ability just to shotgun out a ice type non-stab, mind you, an ice type move, and it does super effective damage on them, and it actually chunks their HP. So I would argue that hidden power might even effectively lead into the whole color soup thing if you play Magic the Gathering or study Magic the Gathering design in any capacity, right? How bad formats and why the color exists is to prevent color soup, where, suddenly if you have a deck that has counterspell, but it also has mana ramp, and it also has, heavy hitters like red, and you also have regen and lifelink and death touch, right? And all in one deck, right? Okay, suddenly you're just like, okay, but this actually is just a color soup. Everything does everything fairly well. Why are we going to bother with color specialization at that point? I would argue it could potentially be an issue that is related. That is a discussion I'd have to have with, people that study game design.
And that both the expected and unexpected hidden powers were incredibly strong. For instance, in Generation 4, Mix Infernape was a force with its standard choice of hidden power ice, even when you knew to expect it, because it meant Pokemon like Gliscor and Dragonite or Salamence, when it was legal, couldn't withstand a hit from it, which was a huge part of 8 being able to threaten as much as it did. However, when it's slapped on the rarer hidden power Electric, the results could also be devastating, as it would completely turn the tables on one of its checks that was usually quite reliable, Gyarados. And to top things off, the opponent wouldn't know it didn't have HP Ice until it revealed Electric, so Ape could still use the threat of its standard HP Ice to chase out a healthy Gliscor. Of course,
well, that's what we run into in the in Yu-Gi-Oh's OCG. For those of you that don't know, there are 2 formats. I think there's technically 3 formats, that was recent. There used to be OCG which is Asia, right? You got your Japan, you got your Korea. You have the TCG, which is the US, but you also used to, this was about Tellarknight, Deneb had a ruling, and there was like Europe rulings, but I think Europe and America, US and Mexico, so like I think they've all organized under a single TCG. The reason why I cite that is there used to be a ruling with Tellarknight Deneb where if you used Call of the Haunted to summon it, because on summon you could tutor a card out, it ended up being that in Europe, because it hit the board, you could do it, but in America, in the US, because a judge ruled it as such, because it doesn't actually hit the field, it's still like resolving, it doesn't actually get the search effect. And thus, that's why there was a discrepancy between TCG NA and TCG Europe, and I think they've all normal. Anyways, moving on from that subject. Like we see this in the OCG though. In this is a very popular card if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh in any capacity called Max C, and Max C is a format warping card for all intents and purposes. And so what I mean by that is if you are going to be playing in the OCG, if you're going to be playing in Japan, if you're going to be playing anywhere that offers OCG, or even if you're playing OCG in the States, right, just specifically OCG format, and even Master Duel to a degree, it's not OCG, but it does have it, you have to accommodate for the fact that the format has Max C. Whether you run Max C or not, you have to be cognizant that it is in the format. You must always understand that Max C is there. So how this relates to this, it's not even that Infernape has to even reveal that it has hidden power, or what type of hidden power. It doesn't even have to have it in its moveset. It's the fact that it's popular enough, and generally Infernape has hidden power. Generally it's this. Okay, but what if it's not this? What if it's not this type, but it ends up being this type hidden power? Am I swapping into something? And these are all lines of play that you have to consider when you're dealing with a move as omnipresent as hidden power on a Pokemon that is as good as Monkey, as good as Infernape, right? And so there's a little bit of parallels. It's not necessarily that, I mean, there's arguments that have been happening for, I guess, decades at this point, right? In regards to Max C and if it should be banned or if it shouldn't be banned, if it's healthy for the game, if it's not healthy for the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's for many, many people that are in the sphere more specialized than I do to really discuss. What I can bring to the table is that similarly, it seems like hidden power ended up being a situation where you can just slap hidden power on, and it doesn't even have to really, you don't have to use it in the game. But the threat of it existing is the problem. It's that you have to account for it because it's in the format, and thus you have to change your playstyle accordingly.
There does exist a physical counterpart in Natural Gift, but its one-time use and reliance on berries meant that such sets, while completely unseen, were on the rarer side. There's a reason why Natural Gift Fire Gyarados, while potentially threatening, was a gimmick, and why Hidden Power Fire Grass types are standard. Z moves are another point of comparison. And well, while they are not exactly the same as Hidden Power, of course, they were controversial for similar reasons. Partially their brute force on stab moves, yes, but also in the way that they enabled threat potential via coverage options that otherwise wouldn't be available in a manner that made any sort of real impact. Sometimes it wasn't even about which hidden power a Pokemon would have, but if it even had hidden power at all. Gen 5 Volcarona, for instance, usually...
So what did I just say? It's not even that they have to have it. It's not even that your opponent's playing Max C. It's that you have to account for it in the format. It is a thing. It is a force to be reckoned with. You have to understand it's there. Even if you don't run into it, you still have to account for it.
Had ground as its hidden power of choice, but could also throw ice in there highly effectively, or sometimes even water when used on rain teams. However, Volcarona's move pool was so deep, you didn't even know if it was using hidden power at all until it revealed it, as opposed to something like many electric types throughout the generations like Gen 3 Jolteon or Raikou, with move pools so sparse that you knew they would use some type of hidden power. The question was more in that specific example, grass versus ice. This wasn't necessarily much comfort, given how scary they were with that choice alone, which itself speaks to the sheer excellence of hidden power. So then consider that some Pokemon had an array of hidden powers as a luxury, a flexible choice of their move pools, and just how much more frightening and difficult to deal with that made them. Hidden power is especially powerful for such coverage purposes in generations 2 through 5, in which hidden power is 70 base power. In 6 and 7, it is base 60, although this doesn't exactly stop it from being a metagame force.
Wait, how much did it used to be?
6 and 7, it is base generations 2 through 5, in which hidden power is 70 base power. In 6 and 7, it is base 60.
Okay, I thought it was always 60, but then again, remember, it wasn't in... I very distinctly remember in Fire Red, didn't Flamethrower used to have 95 base power, but now it's only at 90? I think that was... Like Gen 5 going forward? I don't remember when it was. Maybe it was Gen 4 going forward. But like, I mean, rebalances and retweaks like this all the time happen, especially if a move has a high enough usage statistic.
Although this doesn't exactly stop it from being a metagame force. Oraz Latios or Mega Diancie still smack the likes of Ferrothorn or Mega Metagross with Hidden Power Fire, for example. Furthermore, in Generation 7, Hidden Power lost the drawback it had always had, that it was dependent on a Pokemon's IVs, something that famously factored into its use. For example, it was impossible for Pokemon with Hidden Power Fire to possess a perfect speed stat, and this was a crucial consideration in both using and facing them. In Gen 7, though, this was no longer an issue, making Hidden Power even more spam than it already was.
That's so interesting.
Nothing Hidden Power couldn't do. Nowhere its reach didn't extend, as demonstrated by uses of the move that are, on a surface level, completely and utterly ridiculous, but actually work incredibly well in practice, as they have been chosen for such specific coverage purposes that they almost can't help but do the job they were chosen for. This is something only Hidden Power can do. For instance, Ferrothorn possesses a truly dismal base special attack stat of 54. To give some frame of reference for just how awful this is, Ferrothorn has a lower special attack stat than many first stage Pokemon, including Voltorb, Cutiefly, and Pico herself.
It's actually, I love that Pico. It was Pico. Oh, that's so good. But yeah, no, it's abysmal. And like, that's actually where modern Pokemon design actually is hitting a lot of things. There's a lot of cool thresholds. Like, remember, like Cursula has, it's like, what's Cursula? It's got like a really stupid like special attack and special defense. Like, it's actually quite buku. And so we see certain specializations like this that rather than having like even stat spread, you know, we have a Ferrothorn with a 54, which is paltry even in comparison to Pico and some of the other first stage evolutions, right? But the stats are allocated in just such the right way that it just makes sense.
However, in Generation 7 OU, Ferrothorn was a legitimate user of Hidden Power Fire. Oh, haha for other Ferrothorn, right? Nope, Knockoff was better for that. One of Ferro's biggest issues was, as irritating as his move pool was, how badly it tended to get taken advantage of by one of the scariest Pokemon in the tier, Kartana. However, with Kartana's horrendous special defense and quadruple weakness to fire, Ferrothorn became a lure, as if it didn't do enough already. Kartana would see Ferrothorn as a switch-in opportunity, and Ferrothorn would HP fire it into dust. If Ferrothorn could...
Everyone was running it. Not necessarily HP fire, but I mean, I remember specifically running Alolan Muck back in the day, back in Gen 7. And I mean, we were running... people were running Fire Blast for it. Running Fire Blast. I thought I got Fire Fang. We were teching non-stab fire moves to deal with Kartana.
Could use Hidden Power, then anything could, and that was absolutely incredible. And Ferrothorn is far from the only low special attack Pokemon to effectively use Hidden Power. HP Fire was effectively used by Fortress, a Pokemon with similarly awful special attack, coming in behind the likes of Pimpla, Krogunk, and Flabebe in Generations 2 and 3 to get the edge against opposing Fortress. In Gen 2, Fortress's HP Fire also helped its team deal with Steelix. Fortress also used Hidden Power Ice to excellent effect in Generation 5, leveraging its great physical bulk to score quadruple effective hits against major metagame targets in Gliscor and the legal at the time Landorus Incarnate. Heck, even the purest physical attacker imaginable, Terrakion, briefly used Hidden Power Ice on some sets in Gen 5 to deal with Gliscor and Landorus T. Furthermore,
well, they're just such big threats. I mean, if you're going to deal with Lando T, or you're going to deal with Gliscor, right? I mean, you might as well use everything at your disposal, especially because how big of names they are in the tier and how big, you know, what their usage is, right? Especially as common as they are and as not necessarily omnipresent, but the fact that they show up a lot, right? Yeah, if you need it and it's going to make your life easier, why not take the HP Ice?
there was a period in ORAS where Mega Scizor was immensely difficult to deal with. And how did players adapt? Why, with Hidden Power Fire, of course, but it wasn't coming from the usual suspects like Latios. No, it was coming from Landorus T, choosing to give up its all-important Hidden Power Ice, as well as opposing Mega Scizor. These aren't as outright weak as the previous examples. Landorus T famously has good special attack, as is on full display when two opposing ones will Hidden Power Ice each other from Gens 5 through 7, while Mega Scizor's Technician ability actually powered HP Fire up from 60 to 90. But nevertheless, they are further effective examples of Hidden Power's capability to take advantage of quadruple weaknesses, and capability which is perhaps the most questionable example of its competitiveness or lack thereof. Though they could not be more dissimilar in almost every other way, this is the link between Gens 1 and 8, and to a lesser extent, 9. The lack of Hidden Power means Pokemon cannot surprise their counters with such ease. In Gen 1, Zapdos cannot beat Rhydon, just as Reggie...
This actually looks really cool, the emulator, how it's the old sprites. Like, that actually looks super, super cool. I love it.
Just as Regieleki cannot be Landorus in Generation 8. In any other generation, both these grounds are a hidden power away from getting crushed, and would have to take this into account with their team and play. But in a game of as much uncertainty as Pokemon, the safety of one poke truly countering another is a highly appreciated facet of these generations. This mostly applies to Gen 9 too, the Pokemon that aren't terrestrializing anyway, which is most of them. Regieleki is actually a perfect example of this dynamic. If it had been introduced in a generation with hidden power, it likely would have been overwhelmingly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
Seeing as it was completely and utterly blanked by any ground type, it didn't amount to much in OU. Then in Gen 9, it was so bonkers with Terra that it got banned incredibly fast. Even though the Terra was telegraphed and in fact necessitated for Regieleki to actually threaten the opponent, it didn't matter. It was just that good. So
and that's wild to consider. Even if you telegraph what you're doing a mile away, right? The fact that even with that telegraph, they cannot stop it. They can't do anything about it because it's just going to happen, right? Ain't no brakes on the pain train, that kind of thing. That is wild to consider how oppressive that is in a format.
We know that hidden power was essential coverage for many of the most threatening Pokemon around. Pokemon that were pushed to or over the brink of being bearable with its help. Thundurus never would have been banned from Gen 5 OU without it, for instance. And even Pokemon that didn't need hidden power could become even more threatening with it. See Advanced Tyranitar, who ran many great sets without the move, but unleashed several of its most dangerous variants with the help of hidden power Bug to drop Celebi or Claydol, or hidden power Grass to smash through its most dependable counter, Swampert. We also know that hidden power was so good that even Pokemon with awful special attack stats could take it on for a niche use. Though on the rarer side, certain Hippowdon were spotted in Generation 4 using hidden power flying to shore up a stall team's weakness to Breloom. This makes it...
Hippowdon's one of those weird ones. I always think it's Gen 5. Like, I always remember it, and I always remember finding it outside of, it wasn't in Boston. It was whatever the big city in Black and White was. I can't remember. It was the one with the docks. Anyways, but like, I always remember to the north of it, the desert to the north of it, like I think it was the construction site, right? I always remember finding Hippowdon there. And so that's why I always go back to like DPP or BDSP. And I'm just like, why is there Hippo here? Oh, right, you're actually Gen 4. It's kind of like how people think like Slugma and Macargo are like Gen 3, right? I think it's like Fiery Path and Ruby Sapphire Emerald, right? Like one of those Pokemon that just like, you have to scratch your head and like remember what generation they're actually from. Like how Bonsly is actually technically Gen 4, but it did show up in a Gen 3 game. It showed up in XD Gale of Darkness.
Quite easy to paint a picture of hidden power as too good at what it did. But is this necessarily the case? Hidden power definitely had its good points too. The most dramatic example was how as soon as it was removed in Generation 8, the player base was certain Gliscor, which had already been incredibly obnoxious to deal with for several generations, would now be too much for OU were it ever released, which almost surely would have been the case, especially because it was too much for the tier upon its release in Generation 9's Teal Mask DLC. Of course, at the time of this video, it has returned to the tier with the release of the Indigo Disc, but the point remained that without Hidden Power Ice being as popular as it had been previously, Gliscor's defensive profile became outrageously effective, even though it had lost access to Roost. Overall though, as the game of Pokemon adds not just more threats, but bigger threats, as exemplified in the many hyper min-max threats of Generations 9, it generally stands that taking away options that are offensive first and foremost help in this regard. It helps limit the off-difficult to withstand explosiveness of modern generations. This is not just exemplified in the immediate, amusing example of two Landers T not being locked in a game of chicken in their Hidden Power Ice standoff, being replaced with more nuanced options instead. It's demonstrating how something like Gen 8 Tapu Koko, no longer able to HP ice its way through grounds anymore, must take a different, more systematic approach if it wishes to not be completely blocked by them.
I think that the removal of it's always weird because it feels like Sword and Shield runs smoother. I don't know. I think Sword and Shield was peak 3D personally, but I'm also in the minority. I like Sword and Shield over Scarlet and Violet, even though I enjoyed the story. I think the battles just flowed a little better. It almost, until some updates, it felt like Scarlet and Violet were just losing frames in multiplayer, and it was hurting my eyes for a little bit. But yeah, no, like, I think it warps the format in a good way. I think that it removing this omnipresent threat actually encourages more skilled play than having to throw HP on a Tapu Koko, because Tapu Koko can then suddenly deal with Garchomp, Hippo, etc. Well, if you give me Pot Agreed, if you give my tier 3 deck Pot Agreed, they'll be fine. Okay, but what happens if you give, your tier 1 and tier 0 decks like Pot Agreed, right? Like, you're making this argument, well, if I get Pot Agreed, it'll be fine, right? Me and my Dark Magician deck with Pot Agreed will be fine. Okay, you don't, like, What about full power dragon rulers? What if you give them pot of greed? What if you give Sky Striker pot of greed, right? That kind of thing, right? Just because it works for some things. And well, that's when you can even have like a Smogon thing where it's like lower tiers you can use this, or in higher tiers you might not be able to use hidden power, right? You could have a meta with and meta without it. It's a very interesting move that is just, it's just omnipresent through the generations. And so it's really fascinating to see how the game changes without it, and how players have to accommodate for it not being in the format by shifting their playstyle in different ways. I would argue that this is very similar to Max C in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Demonstrated in Volcarona no longer being able to hidden power ground its way through what would otherwise be the most perfect counter imaginable, Heat Ran. Though that Gen 8 idea was, of course, hilariously upended by terrestrialization. Defensive Pokemon generally appreciate the loss of hidden power more, as this helps give them some stability in an increasingly powerful game. And given the utterly monstrous power creep of Gen 9, such stability needs to be taken wherever it can be found. In conclusion, we believe the removal of hidden power was ultimately good for the game.
Agree.
I wonder if there could have been more balance found in previous generations without them. Maybe Gliscor would be too much as well. True, funny as that is to imagine, but threats like Thundurus and Volcarona would be far more palatable without them, and that likely would have contributed to greater balance overall. Furthermore, if hidden power were to return, it'd be essential that it remains 60 base power, which was far more balanced for such a move. It'd be interesting to see generations 2 through 5 with this weakened form of hidden power. GSC Zapdos in particular would not be the overbearing monster it is now if its HP ices and occasionally waters lost 10 base power, and it'd generally be easier to take a hit from all manner of attacks reliant on the move in every generation, from offensive Calm Mind Jirachi in generations 3 and 4 to Alakazam and Keldeo in generation 5 and 6, and everything in between. So all in all, hidden power is a bit much, and its removal for the game is a positive, but the 60 base power version was, while still on the overwhelming side with how it enabled certain threats, is far more reasonable overall. Thanks for watching, everyone.
No, I agree.
And as always,
100%.
if you like the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about our video? Do you think hidden power was broken, or do you think it should come back? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well.
No, I actually really agree with this. I think that this was a very well done piece. There's a lot of information brought to the table and cited. I agree with that conclusion 100%, actually. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to let him do his outro really quick. I absolutely love him. If you haven't checked out False Swipe Gaming
on these social media platforms, and that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.
No, if you haven't checked out False Swipe Gaming, he and his team put out amazing work. Like, they really do a lot of really cool work. And I had one of his team, I think, reach out. I think they did. I recognized a shiny Umbreon at once. I recognized the shiny Volcarona in here, for instance. And shiny Volcarona is chef's kiss. I do like Slitherwing, though. I've been looking for a shiny Slitherwing in Gen 9. That's one of those ones that I got to hunt down because I love him. I do love my big moth. He is the moth meme. If you haven't checked out False Swipe Gaming, him and his team are amazing creators. If whenever I look for something in terms of competitive Pokemon, maybe I'm looking at a Pokemon and hey, how have they been doing? You know, what have they been doing over the years? What is their specialty? What are their strengths, weaknesses? What do they have to contend with? Or maybe I want to go back to prior generations, right? So hey, you know, what is GSC? Oh, GSC is a very tank and defensive oriented meta. So you got your Snorlax, you got your Zapdos, you got your Raikou, your Lugia and Ho-Oh. You know, Lugia is the Great Wall, so to speak. Chansey, Blissey, right? And things like that. If you're looking for information on Pokemon, competitive Pokemon, and throughout the years, how things have evolved, and even things in the kits, definitely go check out False Swipe Gaming. You know, I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not paid to say this. This is just a dingus on the internet reacting to who I think is a very good creator, and they're putting out excellent work, and it's very analytical, and it's very down to earth, and they bring receipts and citations, and, you know, they bring very good arguments. I do think that hidden power did need to be removed from the game for the health of the game. I absolutely do agree with that. It'd be very interesting to see a Gen 9 with hidden power. I'd be curious how that changed the meta. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think that this was on point? Do you think that hidden power did need to be banned? Do you think hidden power didn't need to be banned? Did you use hidden power sets? Do you still use hidden power sets? Maybe in Nuzlocke, or going back to Pokemon Advance or DS, right? You know, what are your niche specialties with that? What do you like putting hidden power on? What and on what? Let me know in the comment section, all that fun stuff. Definitely go check out FSG and his team, and I will see you all in the next one.